And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today, man, there's a lot to talk about. So last week, some tangentially related versus news dropped, and I recorded a whole show about it. And then when I sat down to edit it, I did not like my tone. So I'm going to attempt to, somewhat hilariously, talk about Lorcana today and not get all fired up. So for anybody who has been living under a rock, Upper Deck has sued Ravensburger, alleging that the game design behind the Disney-themed trading card game that's supposed to come out in a few weeks was actually stolen intellectual property from Upper Deck. Now, immediately the Facebook lawyers came out and went, "You can't copyright, you can't trademark game mechanics, so this lawsuit must be frivolous, and Upper Deck's an evil company." And okay, so I am all about criticizing what deserves to be criticized, but I'm also all about trying to be honest and use the truth. And there's just so many little nuances to this whole lawsuit thing. And this does eventually connect to Versus, I promise. But there's so many nuances in this little lawsuit thing that I think people just gloss over and bend to fit whatever narrative it is that they're trying to push. So I want to kind of break all this stuff down, and then I want to talk about why this might have something to do with Versus. So first of all, we only know Upper Deck's side of this story. As of this moment in time, Ravensburger has only gone so far as to say that Upper Deck's case is meritless and they look forward to their day in court, which is like what everybody says. Whether you're innocent or guilty, that's what you say. So the details of what's being alleged is that one game designer in particular, a fella named Ryan Miller, was under contract creating a game for Upper Deck called Rush of Ichor. This game, the details of how this game was intended to be played are included in Upper Deck's legal complaint, and there are a lot of similarities to Lorcana. That's just true. Anybody who's reading these and go, "Oh, these two games are totally different," okay, you're not being honest. But there's a lot of similarities between more or less every trading card game. So the case is not about Lorcana is Rush of Ichor. This is just a complete misunderstanding. Anybody who is making these types of arguments, like the case is meritless because you can't trademark game mechanics, hasn't read the complaint. They don't know what they're talking about, and should probably shut up until they read the complaint and learn what they're talking about. So what is being alleged is that Ryan Miller took the ideas and essentially the game that he created. And I realize when we're talking about IP, there isn't a tangible asset, but nonetheless, he essentially sold the same work product twice. He worked for Upper Deck, selling them the game mechanics and the structure of Rush of Ichor, and then left that contract, got hired at Ravensburger, and essentially gave the exact same game with a few minor tweaks to Ravensburger for Lorcana. So Ryan Miller is named personally and Ravensburger is named. So Upper Deck, in addition to alleging that this employee took internal Upper Deck intellectual property, and let's be really clear. So I will engage with the you can't copyright game mechanics claim for a minute here. That is true. Once a game is released, the instructions for that game, the rulebook itself can be copyrighted, but the instructions, the mechanics of the game are not something that you can have protection under the law for. In most cases, there are some wiggly little examples, but we're not talking about a game that was released. We're talking about internal development. So intellectual property of Upper Deck that has not ever been, nobody who's ever seen these rule sets has been not under an NDA, I'm sure. So, well, I guess I don't know that for sure, but I think it's reasonable to assume that while a game is in development, the only people who are seeing it are signing an NDA before they see it. So the entire argument of this is clearly so when people say this is clearly a cash grab lawsuit that's frivolous and Upper Deck is just doing slimy Upper Deck things, these are people who either haven't read the complaint or they're so blinded by their preconceived notions about the kind of company that Upper Deck is that they're not willing to honestly engage with the facts of the matter. That's just frankly indisputable. Like, if you read the complaint and you come away from it going, these game mechanics can't be copyrighted, you're either not turning on your brain or bias has eaten your sense. So moving on to kind of the next layer of this, which is the timing. So people have pointed out that Rush of Icor was only trademarked by Upper Deck relatively recently. That's true. And that they are timing this lawsuit specifically to mess up the Gen Con release of Lorcana. That could be true. That could all be factual. I think it's pretty silly to say that Upper Deck should have acted like they had nothing to act on until they had access to the full rule set of Lorcana, which has only been a few weeks. So this idea that they waited forever, maybe, but also maybe when you're dealing with, multi-million-dollar companies and this kind of legal action, maybe you want to be really, really careful and make sure all your ducks are in a row, and it takes a few weeks to make that happen. That's also possible. I don't really know either way on that. So one thing Upper Deck did that I think, so it's hard to know. There are two ways you can look at this. You can look at this as Upper Deck trying to cover for a weak case with bluster, or you can look at this as confidence. So when I look at the fact pattern that Upper Deck rolled this lawsuit out and posted it everywhere, made it extremely public, I think that reduces the likelihood that this lawsuit is frivolous, and it reduces the likelihood that Upper Deck is just trying to get a quick payout off of a competitor. I think they have a case. Now, we don't know exactly what all the details of the specifics of the contract that Miller signed. It also seems like Upper Deck is kind of alleging that Ravensburger sort of knew that Miller was taking Upper Deck IP, or at least they should have known. I'm really not sure how they are going to be able to prove that Ravensburger should have known. I guess there does exist within American jurisprudence the concept of a sophisticated operator or an expert. And in certain, if I were to enter into an investment contract with someone who does not know a lot about real estate and that goes south, I could be held responsible, given that I am considered to be a sophisticated investor due to my lengthy history in that arena. So it is possible that something like this is what Upper Deck is alleging about Ravensburger, but that seems really flimsy to me. So I'm guessing that there's more to it than that, but I could be wrong. So another thing that's been thrown around a lot that I want to engage with is this accusation that, 15 years ago, Upper Deck forged Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Yeah, that happened, but the company that forged the Yu-Gi-Oh cards technically was a subsidiary of Upper Deck called Upper Deck Entertainment. Now, there is still an entertainment division within Upper Deck, but it's just if you're gonna go and make these broad accusations and say Upper Deck is X, you should have the facts straight. And the facts are the Upper Deck company that we are buying product from today is not the same entity that forged Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Now, I don't think that fully absolves them of any guilt. As I understand it, the person who ran UDE during the time of the Yu-Gi-Oh card forgery, when UDE closed and was kind of absorbed back into Upper Deck proper, that individual changed jobs and went right back to Upper Deck. So they didn't get rid of this person who committed this crime. I think we can accurately describe the forgery of items of value and repackaging them a crime. That is, and it's such a brazen one too. But the idea that 15 years ago Upper Deck committed a crime, what does that have to do with anything? So does that mean that Ryan Miller and Ravensburger are allowed to just steal internal development documents from Upper Deck and sell them as their own because a decade and a half ago, Upper Deck tried to defraud Konami and the public with forged Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I don't think that's reasonable at all. That's actually completely ridiculous. And I think anybody who's making that argument just hasn't thought it through. Like, imagine that you're a 16-year-old and you shoplift some like Pokemon cards, right? And you get caught. So now you have a track record. You have a criminal record as somebody who stole a thing. So 15 years later, now you're an adult, you know better, you've learned from it, but because 15 years ago you stole Pokemon cards, that means I can come into your house and steal your TV and you can't go to the police because you did a crime. This is just ridiculous. Like, nobody would want to live in that society. And like, making this argument is just so brainless that I really, the only thing I can, to be charitable to people who are making this argument, the only thing I can think is what they're trying to say is that Upper Deck did an unethical thing 15 years ago or whatever it was. I don't remember the exact dates of the Yu-Gi-Oh card forgery mess. And therefore, because they did that, the company is still doing an unethical thing now, and therefore everything they do we have to assume is unethical. And that's just not how anything works. Like even the most hardened of criminal is, still nice to their mom, as like a kind of clumsy, ham-handed example. I just, like, what we have to do is just look at the facts of this case and operate based on the facts of this case. And saying things like, well, Upper Deck tried to deliberately infringe on FFG's trademark when they published the versus LCG. That's like, okay, first of all, that requires mind reading in order to make that claim. And second of all, isn't it just a more reasonable explanation that they just did a dumb thing? Like, if the truth is so damning, why do we have to lie? I've never understood this hyperbolic need, this pressure people have to take the facts and then inject a little intention or hyperbole into it to just, I guess, make their narrative a little more cohesive. But like, if the narrative isn't cohesive on its own merits, then it's probably not a thing you should believe. So, okay, that's me engaging in a cool-headed way with all of these Facebook copyright attorneys' ridiculous arguments that I've been seeing for the last week or so. What do I think? I find it extremely difficult to believe that Upper Deck would behave in this way if there wasn't some merit to their accusations. And the biggest reason I'm skeptical of this being a frivolous lawsuit is the connection that I think this may have to Versus. So let's run a thought experiment. For a moment, let's pretend that Upper Deck is completely full of it. This is a totally frivolous lawsuit. All they're trying to do is get a court injunction to threaten the release of Lorcana, to put Ravensburger in a really tight spot. I mean, I assume Ravensburger has a deal with Disney and they have certain deadlines that they have to meet, or there's financial penalties. So let's assume that Upper Deck is being completely, they're making these accusations with a handful of air, and all they're trying to do is create enough pressure that Ravensburger says, hey, here's some thousands or millions of dollars, whatever it takes, to just dismiss this suit, get it out of the way so that they can maintain their relationship with Disney and get this card game off the ground. Okay, if that is the actual facts of the matter, now I understand Disney is not Marvel, but Disney owns Marvel, and Upper Deck has a relationship with Marvel. Now, if I'm Disney and I'm looking at this much hyped trading card game that's supposed to come out here in a few weeks, and one of the companies that I have a professional relationship with is trying to blow that all up. Now, I understand the sales for Lorcana probably don't go directly to Disney. The proceeds from sales probably go to Ravensburger, and then Ravensburger has some kind of a licensing fee that they pay Disney. But the money to pay that fee obviously is going to come from the sales of Lorcana. So eventually, if we take enough steps down the chain, messing with Lorcana will mess with Disney profits. And if I'm Disney, I cannot understand being cool with maintaining a professional relationship with Upper Deck if Upper Deck is frivolously trying to blow up this other profitable venture that we have on the side. Like, that's not how good business partners would necessarily operate. I get, again, Upper Deck is not directly suing Disney, and Upper Deck presumably doesn't have a contract directly with Disney. It's probably with Marvel. But it seems like if I was in Upper Deck's shoes, firing off a frivolous lawsuit, hoping for a maybe payday, public relations damage be damned, I would be less worried about public perception and more worried about, hey, when our Legendary contract or our Versus contract comes time for renewal, how is Marvel going to look at us if we've earned this reputation as being the kind of company that's willing to throw frivolous lawsuits in the competition's way? Like, I'm not making this point as clearly as I want, I think, but the general idea is Upper Deck isn't just risking public perception, legal humiliation. They're potentially risking a pretty significant business relationship with regard to their entertainment products. Now, Legendary is a game that I don't follow nearly as closely as Versus. Well, I again enjoy it. I'm not throwing any shade at Legendary, but that's a moneymaker for Upper Deck in a way that I think Versus probably isn't. I think Upper Deck most likely Legendary outsells Versus by a significant margin, although that's just kind of me speculating. I don't have the facts on that. Regardless, endangering that relationship does not, I just can't believe. And I'll be honest, there have been plenty of times when I have heard Upper Deck say stuff or make decisions that I just can't believe, that I don't understand, that seems tone deaf, boneheaded, it's self-defeating. I've used a lot of negative descriptive words for Upper Deck's choices over the years on this show. And to be fair, I've also offered a lot of praise when I feel like that's warranted as well. What I try to do is comment honestly about what's going on. And what I honestly think is that it's just ridiculous to jump to the conclusion that Upper Deck would do this with nothing to back it up. I just find that too hard to believe. Now, if it turns out when this goes to court that this is just a frivolous lawsuit, well, hey, I'll have to eat those words, and that's fine. But from where I'm standing from now, it seems to me like Upper Deck has to have something to back this up, at least actionable cause that makes them think this admittedly pretty significant gamble is worth taking. And that's taking into account how it might impact their relationship with Disney, as well as the actual merits of the case. Now, they may yet lose. They may not have good enough evidence. They may even be right. It might be true that the allegations against Ryan Miller are 100% correct, that he did take the work product that he was paid by Upper Deck to create and then deliver that same work product to Ravensburger, essentially selling the same work twice. That could be the case, and they could still lose. Because if you can't prove it in court beyond a reasonable doubt, it doesn't matter if you're right. If you don't have the evidence to back it up, it doesn't matter if you're right in court. So we could see Upper Deck lose this case, which of course will make all of the people, all those Facebook copyright lawyers come out and claim vindication, say they were right all along, whether they actually were right all along or not. So it's hard to, and again, I mentioned this at the top and I'm going to mention it again here. We only have Upper Deck's side of the story. So I have to assume that all the stuff in Upper Deck's complaint is slanted very heavily towards Upper Deck's side of the story. Like, there may be details that were left out of the complaint that would mitigate the accusations that are being made. There may be accusations that they don't fully have the evidence to back up and rest on some amount of speculation or kind of filling in the blanks after the fact. We just don't know. Until Ravensburger answers with something other than just like, hey, this is all lies, dudes, we're really not going to. And I have to think that this is going to start moving through the courts relatively quickly, given that what Upper Deck wants is Lorcana to not come out in August, which is mere weeks away. So, okay, that is kind of how I feel about the overall landscape of this Lorcana Upper Deck lawsuit issue. And really the only connection point I see to Versus is if Upper Deck is acting in a frivolous manner here, I would worry about how that impacts their long-term relationship with Marvel's owner, Disney. So setting all that aside, some other things that I want to discuss on the show, because it's been a minute. Matt Parrell won the Seattle Regional, so shout out to him. Congratulations. That's awesome. I wish there was maybe a little more coverage about that event in the community for those of us who weren't able to make it out there. But as always, it's nice to see there's events popping off, and particularly at the local store level and not just at conventions. That's very cool. We have had the announcement of Marvel Zombies coming to Versus, and I don't know totally how I feel about that. Like, I on the one hand, I'm down with it just because it's new Marvel stuff. On the other hand, Marvel Zombies was some of the very last cards that was released for the old Versus system, so there is a part of me that feels like a twinge of paranoia, a twinge of worry about what Marvel Zombies coming to new Versus might mean, given their placement in the expansions of old Versus. That's probably just a little bit of silliness on my part, though. Generally speaking, I think the idea of tapping into the zombie universe for cards is probably fine. It'll probably be fun. I'd like to see maybe some more like tier 3, like obscure Marvel characters. In a way, Marvel Zombies is kind of an excuse to give us another Hulk, another Iron Man, another Captain America, and Colonel America. So a lot of these characters that have been done before, yeah, this is a new context, and I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it once I see the cards. But out of all the properties they could have announced, it's okay. It's cool. I mean, it's fine. It's when I initially read about Marvel Zombies, I was like, yeah, this is cool. And then the more I thought about it, it was, hey, this is just going to be more versions of Spider-Man, more versions of a bunch of characters that we've seen before. And I'd really like to see a Runaways expansion or some of these more obscure characters. Even a box that's just like, hey, here's all the weirdos, and they give us a bunch of like weird obscure characters. Although commercially, I don't know if that would do particularly well. It sounds like Boys is going to come soon. AEW is going to be this year as well, from the rumors. And we have already gotten spoilers started for the Cosmic Power arc, which is going to be Fantastic Four 3 small box set. And I'm pretty pumped for this one. I actually made an error the other day. I changed the cover photo for the Versus Collective group to promote the Cosmic arc, and then apparently Facebook decided I wanted to post it 20 more times. So apologies to everybody for the spam. That was not intentional. I've been I will do a card reveal reaction YouTube video for the spoiler article that came out yesterday or the day before, whatever day it was, hopefully this evening. So that's on the horizon as well. All in all, I'm feeling pretty pumped about Versus. It's been a little bit hard for me to take my eyes off anything other than just playing with these Mortal Kombat cards. I've had such a good time with this box. It really kind of makes me hope that we see like Street Fighter or like some other fighting game card. Like Mortal Kombat was just such a good fit. Oh man. While we're talking about Mortal Kombat, there was an interview that Beats did. I'll try to remember to link it in the show notes below. On YouTube, and he mentioned Warner Brothers saying, hey, we have these properties, could you do something with Mortal Kombat? And he didn't explicitly confirm that there were other Warner Brothers things coming to Versus, but you go watch this interview and decide for yourself what, if anything, you think it means. I think there are other Warner Brothers related projects in the works, and if that means we're going to see Batman, even if the only way we can get Batman is like Robert Pattinson in Photographic Universe, I will take it. I want Batman in my Versus game. That's the reason I started playing old Versus. I want Batman. So good things overall happening. It's really nice to see that card releases are, I mean, we're not back to normal. I can't make that claim, but there is a cadence that's being approached that is starting to feel a little bit closer to normal. Although it wouldn't be hard to do better than 2022. That was a rough year for Versus releases. This has been The Build Phase. I'm Mr. Ben. Shout out to all my patrons. If you like what we do here, patreon.com/thebuildphase. Join the coolest clubhouse in Versus. Until next time, go win some games.